the third thing that I'm super passionate about is customer service. As technology develops, you take any industry, whatever it is. And the thing that becomes so common is there's so few differences, like price wise, technology speaking, they all copy each other, right? So the thing that has to be the differentiator is the level of customer service. Like, are you willing to go the extra mile? And that creates such an incredible loyalty amongst customers. And it's spilled over into my businesses and my current businesses. And it's allowed me to create lifelong business relationships and ultimately friendships.
Hello, today I have Ainsley joining me to talk about who she is and what she does. So, to start off, tell us about yourself. What is your passion?
So I grew up in the DC area originally, and to two very hardworking parents. And I will say that when I was growing up, the world was a very different place than it is now for you all. And I think that that's very exciting. And I have a lot of things that I have become passionate about over time. And I think a lot of those were learned from my parents. So, for example, both of my parents, incredibly hardworking. They both owned their own businesses. And it took me a long time to realize that traditional learning environments did not work for me. It doesn't work the way that I learn. So I'm what's called a kinesthetic learner. Do you know what that is?
You
So it
learn
means
through
I have to,
experiences?
well, through physical engagement. So
Right.
like I can take notes and I have to see myself writing it, but I have to physically write it. Or if I can get up and move around or physically do something, it commits it to my long-term memory better.
Yeah.
And it took a while for us to figure that out. And luckily my mom was a former teacher, so that did help some. But it did mean that I struggled either being terrific at a class or not doing well at all, depending upon the level of physical engagement. So I think that that was the groundwork between my parents both being entrepreneurs and then me just having a very different learning methodology for me to kind of find over time the things that I am passionate about, the things that I always substitute passion with what is it I ultimately value, right? So for me, it's really three primary things that are very diverse. So I'm passionate about efficiency, which sounds funny, but really it comes down to I have no sacred cows. I do not understand why anybody ever says the sentence, well, this is the way it's always been done. Because to me, we always have an opportunity to examine how a process works, how people work together, what our assumptions are about a thing or a process or a system, and there is always a way to make it better. And the great thing about that is over my years in various businesses, I have, not only learned some things myself, but I have learned from people younger than me, people that are older than me. I mean, if we're looking to be lifelong learners, you can learn from anybody. I mean, there's always something that we have to teach each other. And so efficiency, I would say, is one of them. Another one is community. So I think it's super important. And I was raised this way by my parents to be very involved. I think that we cannot act like we live in a world where there aren't other people who have need of our skill sets or our personality or the love or the things that we have to offer. And one of my favorite stories to tell is when I was growing up, my parents did not have a lot of money. There was several Christmases where my mom made our gifts. And I always tell her that in hindsight, those are the ones I remember, not the ones later on when they had money and could buy toys and such that we just didn't care as much about. And, but my parents, no matter how much money they had, every Christmas we would buy two like cases from the grocery store of navel oranges, because at Christmas, those are such a treat, right? Because it's a taste of brightness in the winter. And my dad would take us to a local homeless shelter and we would give it, because to homeless shelter in DC, that's a treat. I mean, they don't have the budget for it. They just don't get things like that. And then my mom would take my sister and I to the local battered women's shelter, and they don't even let men go. And it's very secretive where it's located. And we would take any toys or anything that we had to offer for some of those kids and spend some time with them and give them the navel oranges. And again, such a treat, but it instilled such a perspective on my sister and I from a very young age that you don't live in this world by yourself. You have to constantly have an eye towards, okay, there are my self-interests and things that I want to develop and learn and be as I grow, but then there's also ways in which that I need to look to the greater world and not act like I live in this world by myself. And the third thing that I'm super passionate about is customer service. As technology develops, you take any industry, whatever it is, and the thing that becomes so common is there's so few differences, like price wise, technology speaking, they all copy each other, right? So the thing that has to be the differentiator is the level of customer service. Like, are you willing to go the extra mile? And that creates such an incredible loyalty amongst customers. And it's spilled over into my businesses and my current businesses, and it's allowed me to create lifelong business relationships and ultimately friendships, because we serve each other at so many levels. And when you set the expectation here, they're never going to go anywhere else because we're always willing to go the extra mile. So
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just um I definitely agree with all of that. I mean, I think a lot of what makes like the first thing you mentioned was efficiency, and it's like to just look at things and to see problems as opportunities, and just like, it doesn't, just because this is the way that it's always been done doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way for things to be done. And so
yes.
yeah, and also with community, that's just something that we really want to grow upon with We Equal School, is a community, but also a community with shared principles and values. And from there, that basically makes it so that people, we have the same goal of just like trying to get the most out of life and to take our unique strengths in in interest to create value for other people. And so,
Mm.
yeah. What is your story?
So I kind of think of that as like, what's the path that got me where I am now? So in that sense, I'll say that, um, I, at the time that I was living just outside DC, that was considered like one of the best school systems in the country at the time, Fairfax County school system. And I did a lot of what they call GT classes, gifted and talented, and things like that. But when I went to college, I was at college for maybe a year and a half and just did not thrive for so many reasons, right? You're in a highly regimented learning environment. And you're in it, first of all, as a freshman, you're in a class of 300 people. And I just couldn't do it. And I left college after about a year and a half. And I did subsequently take some college courses, but ultimately I just decided, what, I'm a self-starter. Like, I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to be a doctor. Obviously, those are professions where you need to go to school. You need very specific set of training. But I want to be in business, and I just don't know what that looks like yet. And so I did a lot of things. I, started with office admin jobs. I taught myself to be a graphics designer. And then in the mid to late 90s, I had like marketing jobs, but I was able to, through connections that I made in the DC area, do some really cool projects. So the US had a bronze medal winning bobsled team. I did the logo for that team and all their subsequent like clothing and everything that they did. And I think that was when we had the Olympics in Utah, or if I'm not mistaken. And then there were some 3-letter agencies that I did some work for, and just various really cool projects like that that I enjoyed. But graphics design is super subjective. And I realized after a while that what I considered good design is ultimately it's like you're arguing with a client about, no, this is a terrible design you want me to do. You could do it in clip art and Word, and that just feels less than. So I decided, well, I don't like something that's subjective. I'm more of a like ABC kind of person. And so I ended up kind of moving more into the technology, web design, social media realm. And that's where I developed my fondness for WordPress as a content management system. And then in about, I think it was 2005 or 2008, somewhere in there, my husband and I, we started our first business together. And that was basically as a WordPress design firm. And then over the years, we've owned several different businesses, virtual businesses, brick and mortar. We had a coffee shop and a digital gaming cafe and things like that. That taught us a lot along the way. And eventually that arrived me at a point where the firm that we own now, which is NRVWeb One, and the NRV stands for New River Valley. We actually rebranded our original firm not too long ago, and we're getting ready to launch a new website soon. But we do, I would term it as we're a boutique firm for small business consulting. So all the experience that we learned over the years turned into, well, you have a startup, right? You need to know soup to nuts. How do I set up an accounting system? What does my customer service look like? Everything. And it's not just a website, because from our perspective, it's never just about a website, right? If we're two businesses and we're investing in each other, and this is a lifelong, relationship and friendship, we want to invest in your business just as much as you're investing in ours by hiring us. And we'll kind of run the gamut of, in our experience, these are the things that work. Do you need to implement like a Salesforce dashboard, or do you need to do this, or do you need to do this? And we really help them talk through their options instead of them randomly doing Google searches, trying to figure out what's sage advice. And we actually really love that, because I think more people should own businesses. I think people would be happier not having this like drone employee existence all the time. And it's a mistake for people to pigeonhole themselves into thinking, well, this is the way, again, sacred cows, this is the way it's always been done. My mom or dad, they went to a company, they worked there for 40 years and retired. I mean, that just doesn't exist anymore. Plus, who wants to do the same job for 40 years? I mean, that just sounds terrible. It's like a slow death. Sorry.
No, it's all right.
I don't lack for opinions.
I
but
mean, I
but yes,
agree.
I guess
Yeah.
that's kind of my story.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I think it's just a lot of adapting and kind of just learning what fits for you, just like trying out a bunch of different things, and also learning about the opportunities and the things that you could do, because it's very easy to like, okay, well, I know all of these, there's some jobs that I can pick, and then just like going down one route. Well, what about the routes you never knew about? That could have been the best option.
And
um
I will say, for some people, that could be a good purpose for college. Like if you don't learn like me, I feel like I'm more the
yeah.
exception to the rule, but college is a great opportunity to take classes in different things and really explore what just tickles your fancy, like what intrigues you. What do you think, man, I don't see myself getting bored with this anytime soon. um, so I think that's one of the things that is great about college for a lot of people.
Yeah. What makes you such a successful entrepreneur?
I have an insatiable need to learn, and just a diligence about it. I am never happy. I'm always learning new things. So when I was a kid, uh, briefly, my parents sent my sister and I to a private school for like the first 2 years, so like kindergarten and first grade. And one of the things that private school did was they taught languages very early, which I'm sure I don't have to tell you because you're very bright. But when you burn those synaptic pathways early, it makes that kind of learning so much easier as you get older. So it taught me that I have a great ability to learn new languages. So over the years, I've taught myself different languages, although I confess I never have anybody to practice with. So I'm super rusty. But at one point, I knew how to fluently speak, obviously not just English, but Spanish, French, and Italian. At some point, I would like get back to those, in my learning. But I'm always reading classic books because I think there is a great deal to learn from them. And I don't consume much of modern fiction, I confess. But just insatiable need to read everything I can get my hands on. I have a list in Amazon of books that I read about or somebody suggests, and I think it's about 300 books long. And I'm on a book budget. I'm not going to lie. I'm not allowed to buy more books right now. So I have to find a way to donate them. But if you're a book fiend like me, it feels like giving away your children. So it's very hard to choose which of your children to donate to Goodwill. But yes, I think if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to have the attitude that what worked to get me here is not going to work for the next stage of development. I have seen so many times where we help an entrepreneur start a business and they get to a critical point where they have to let go of things that they controlled in the beginning, which was necessary for them to control in the beginning. But you have to let go of it. That person you let go of it to is never going to do the job you would, because nobody's as invested in your business as you are. But you have to accept that, okay, they're going to do as good a job as they can, and I can coach them through the rest. And I'm going to accept that at some point, my role is not to do the day to day. My role is to do big picture thinking, direction of the company. But to do that, you have to let go of those things, and you have to be diligent in learning. You have to be learning about your industry. What are new standards of practice in business in general? Things like that. You can never rest on your laurels. And again, no sacred cows. You can't say to yourself, well, this is the way that's been done. It's been working for us. There's no need to change that. No, that's just silly. Because oftentimes, one time I remember I helped a company shave, I think it was $16,000 off their yearly operating budget, just by moving them over to open source software options, right? And so many people overlook that. And I get it. Like, there's a lot of legalities depending upon the type of company that you run about, because not to dig too much into it, but sometimes open source builds on open source and there's licensing issues and whatever. But oftentimes there are options people are unwilling to explore because they think, no, I should have to pay like Adobe $1,200 a year for software, when that's just false. There are so many options out there that are way cheaper and do an equally excellent job. So I've over answered your question now.
No, I mean, I think that's just something that's really important to, because I mean, when you just start, you have this vision and you want to make it happen, and then, but it's also, you are going to have to iterate on your original vision, because you're going to learn new things. Your customers are going to tell you things that maybe they don't like certain aspects of your vision. It's like, but I made this beautiful vision. And it's like, but yeah, it's like, that's not what's really gonna ultimately work out for you. So
And what's interesting is, as an entrepreneur, if you hold on to that original vision too long after you've begun to execute it, you will miss out on opportunities coming to hand because you're so stuck on, well, this is what I wanted to do. You like can't rest there. There's no residing at that place. There is always forward. I mean, you see it in nature, right? There's no such thing as stasis. You're either growing or dying. And that's true of people and businesses.
yeah. Do you see yourself as an innovator, and if so, why?
I love this question because the answer is no. I mean, not in the strictest sense. Like, I think of innovators as like an Elon Musk or something like that. I don't make things, but I tend to think of myself as someone who sees patterns and solutions where others don't. And again, I mean, there is often times where, like, for example, our clients range anywhere from tech startups to real estate to law firms. I mean, it's a wide gamut of industries. But by taking the time to really dig in and learn more about that company, their philosophy, how they want to do work, what their goals are, excuse me, and taking the time as an outsider to understand at least a veneer of their industry, I make connections that they never do. because I bring a completely different perspective to the table. And I think that's one thing that is unique about me, because not everybody can do that, can see the connections between all these different things. Part of the reason why I'm able to do that is because I do so much reading. Like, it's not just I'm always reading about technology or, everything. And I think if you try to silo your knowledge into just what you think you need, it's a mistake. You need to keep a wide swath of information coming into your brain. We think we can't take it, but we can. Like, it's getting filed away somewhere, and you will have that light bulb moment of connection. Like, you know what? We could do this. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's just like everything is so interconnected, and that's one thing
mhm.
we is it's like we will have students and members join, and they'll be like, "This is there's something that you should add to your website, or this part of your website is annoying," and then we'll just like for some of the students and members, we'll just give them access. Like you can go ahead and change it and play around with it because they give a new perspective. We don't know what it's like to be someone who stumbles across our website or our Facebook page and sees everything, because I mean we've been doing it for a year, so it's really easy to get stuck in the mindset of not being able to look at your product or service from the outside. So
Yeah. Are you familiar with? I feel like what you're really keying in on there is the fact that people are more invested when they feel like they're a part of something bigger. So, I cannot remember the name of the company, but there was a guy, I think in California or Washington State, who he raised the minimum salary at his company to $70,000. And the company saw exponential growth. So, and he also decreased the difference between the highest wage earners and the lowest wage earners. Not only did he see growth, he saw productivity increase, customer retention increased. Um, people had more babies on that salary because they felt that they could, but also it's like that old adage about if you have 10 hours to do a thing, it's going to take 10 hours. If you have two, it'll take two, right? So, he discovered that people were really more invested. So in some sense, you've kind of tapped into that. If people feel like, oh, I'm not just here for somebody else who has this vision, like it's all of us rowing in the same direction, having the same goals, and we'll be more powerful, more effective together. So I love that. I love that.
yeah, I mean, it's just it's kind of like we know that we don't know that like what's the best thing for us to do next. That we just need to listen to our users. So we just put our web app team and all of our users in the same Slack group. So it's just like then they can see all the users interacting, and they can see if a student like goes onto our web app and it's like, oh, this one thing is so annoying, or I got this isn't working, or I think this should be added, and then they just see that and then they can start implementing and just like making that feedback loop really really easy to access. um
Mhm.
and so um what are the skills you wish you learned when you were young?
Uh, I think the thing that I most wish I could tell my younger self is to not be so concerned with, like we talked about earlier, these traditional silos of business development. So often people tell you you have to, go to school, go to college, get a good job. Everybody's growth story looks different ultimately. But I spent so much time being concerned with the fact that I was not doing it right. Like I was going through at that time what was a very non-traditional means. Nobody saw the vision of it. I knew eventually it would work out. I didn't know what that path looked like, but I spent so much mental energy like thinking, well, questioning myself, I think, of thinking, am I doing this right? I feel like I'm going in the right direction. It's working for me. I'm learning, I'm growing, all of these things. And my family, it was all kind of horrified. Like they're they're all college graduates, very successful in their own right. Everybody in my family, all my cousins and everybody has like advanced degrees, and we all own our own businesses. And so we're all very entrepreneurial, but my path just looked different than everybody else's. And I'm at a stage in life where I'm okay with that. I don't care. But in hindsight, I regret the mental energy that I spent questioning, is this right for me? When really deep down, I knew like, this is my path. It just doesn't look like everybody else's. And to just love myself through that process instead of constantly questioning, well, is this the right thing to do? I don't know if your age group struggles with that so much because the world is a completely different place, and that non-traditional path is so apparent, I think, now. Do you feel like you struggle with that, or do you feel like, no, it's going to be kind of a hot mess, but in the end it'll work out?
I mean, I think there is still a lot of the culture of, you need to go to college and then get a job. That's still I think very normal. I think there's a lot it's more accepted to do something different, but we still, I mean, when I started homeschooling, we had people just, oh, you're homeschooling, what, like, and then because it's still different, even though it's less different now. But and I think it's like your path, it looked different. Like everybody's path should be different because everybody's different. And even if they go through the traditional path, that's not always going to work out for everybody. But it requires a lot of trusting yourself and trusting that just following your path is going to lead you somewhere good. But that's really hard to do for a lot of people, because in those spots where it's not working out for you, then you're just like, oh no, did I screw it up? What should I have gone to college and just did what everyone else um did? And so I guess, yeah, it is a bit harder to try to follow your own path, but I think it's going to lead you into better places because it's for you. It's uniquely carved out for you and who you are.
Well, and ultimately, I can just say from my perspective, it led me to a point where I am more satisfied with the life I've built, having a healthy work life balance. Like, I want to work, I want to do new things, I want to have projects and work with clients, but I also want to spend time with family and not feel guilty like I should be. You know what I mean? Like, I highly value family, and I'm very aware, as I have older parents, that there's going to come a time in the future at some point where they're not there, but having the flexibility to spend gobs of time with them, and really treasure them in this time in their lives, is amazing. And it leaves me with very little regrets. I will say, even though I spent a lot of mental energy on that when I was younger, I live very few regrets. And I look around at other people, and I think I have way less regrets in life. I am way happier for the life that I've constructed and the opportunities I've given myself than many people around me. My marriage is stronger for it. My relationships are stronger for it. And I just don't struggle with things that other people do.
Um, what is some advice you would like to give to students and members at Wequel School wanting to start their own business?
Start somewhere. You will fail. That's fine. That's the sum total of my advice. Fail. And don't feel like, gosh, that's so embarrassing. Nobody cares. Fail. I mean, if you take every failure as a learning opportunity, and by the way, failure is never like a pass fail proposition. You sometimes, when it looks like we fail, is that we just didn't meet the goal we had for ourselves, but in the process we still learned something incredibly valuable. And who cares if it's embarrassing? Who cares if you start a business and a year later it turns out that's not the business model that works, or it's not what you want? Close the business. Who cares? I can't even tell you how many businesses we've owned over the years that, you know, have either formed into another, we've sold off, or just ended up being a terrible idea altogether. But through all of it, we learned, and it helped us ultimately get to the point where, okay, this is what I want. This is what I'm good at. Not that I'm going to rest on my laurels here, but just fail. Start somewhere, fail. It's fine. Move on. Don't tie up, again, the mental and emotional energy and thinking everybody's watching me and it's so embarrassing. Nobody cares. It's like high school. Once you get out of high school, nobody cares. you know just do what you know, makes sense for you and what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, I think it's also just with like the um you were saying like the mental energy spent on thinking, oh, I'm just like I'm going on a different path than other people and maybe I'm doing it wrong. It's like the men what ultimately you're gonna regret is the mental energy you spent agonizing over your failure or how it's so embarrassing. It's like you look back to other times when you failed or maybe you've done something embarrassing a long time ago and you don't care anymore, you know. So it's more just like, well, what could I have been doing other than thinking, oh no, I'm so embarrassed, why did I do that, you know. But um what is a belief or point of view you hold that is not shared by most other people?
I don't know whether this is shared or not by most other people, but word of mouth marketing is still the most powerful. That is my gem of wisdom. So much strategy is spent on the marketing world about ads, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, Twitter ads, Pinterest ads. And fine, like, yes, there is a place for that depending upon the industry and your business goals. But case in point, for several weeks now, our business has just had a landing page since our rebranding. We haven't even had time to finish our own website because we're so busy, because we have so many repeat clients who over the years just keep coming back to us, and then they refer other people. You know what I mean? Like when we find people that we jive with and we are like-minded in the sense that we want this to be a relationship and not a, transactional relationship, but a true business relationship. And I suffer no embarrassment at the fact that we still have a landing page because we still have so much business. And I tell people, and they're like, "Oh, you haven't finished your website." Yes, that's because I'm so busy working on other people's businesses, and that does not give me one bit of heartache. You know, at some point, I'm just more excited about other people's businesses than I am about my own website. I
Yeah,
know that sounds contrary, but it's just the way I am.
yeah, it's just like instead of focusing so much on marketing and stuff, like actually just make your product or service something people want, because if people want it then they will get it and then they will tell other people about it because it's a good product or it's a good service that you're providing, and then they're going to tell other people. But it's like, oh well, I got this pair of shoes because they had a great Instagram post. Like that's not
Yeah.
really what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Well, and statistics would tell you that people who come to your website or landing page or however you do your marketing funnel
Hmm.
buy ads, you have to have, just for the sake of numbers, let's say you have 1,000 clicks. Only like, I think the statistic is 7 or 8% of them will end up buying, and only 2% of them will be repeat customers. So you spend all this capital outlay for, organic SEO, and it ends up not being as valuable as a referred customer. Like in our case, and I tell all businesses this, you have to decide that customer service is your differentiator. Like you are just so fanatical about being excellent for your own business, being excellent for other people's businesses, and people will always come back to you. So yes. And it kind of goes back to relationships. So you had asked earlier, like what you wish you had learned when you were younger. I think one other thing to tie back into that is I wish I had learned to develop those relationships better when I was younger. I went to so many, like when I lived in DC, up until about 8 years ago, I think, I went to so many different conferences, traveled all over the country to different conferences, New York, Austin, San Francisco, whatever, met so many people who I still am like in contact with. But there are things I could have done at the time when it was a more immediate contact to develop those relationships that would have proved valuable. And we still do kind of keep in touch, but it's just different. So I think that there's ways that we can develop those relationships when we're younger that help us as we're older, in the sense of referrals and business advice and just different things. So I think it's important to find those people early on that you connect with that have an interesting perspective, maybe one that's different than yours, and really take the time to connect. If that means once a month you send them a LinkedIn message that says, hey, just checking in, anything cool going on in your, part of the world, here's something I've been working on, anything, hey, saw your latest post, was so thought provoking, thanks for sharing, little things like that that are a personal touch as opposed to a formulaic message that people are often fond of sending because they're too lazy to put any thought into it.
Yeah, I think that's it's just also like realizing that like relationships are call options where it's like it doesn't have to go anywhere, but if it doesn't, then you didn't lose anything. You know, you just met one other cool person, and then it just like, but if it does blossom into just a really great relationship that where you're just adding value to each other a lot, then that's great.
Mhm.
How can people get a hold of you if they are interested in what you do?
So my business website right now is nrvweb.net, and I have a personal website, AinsleyMcDougal.com. And uh, I am on various social media channels, although I confess I tend to keep much of that private, just because I don't know. I go through stages, but right now I'm in a stage where I feel like too much of my personal stuff is out there. So I've been developing a better habit of posting more on my public channels. But yeah, Twitter. I have a lot of hackers that I like to follow on Twitter because it's a fascination of mine. And so so yeah, cybersecurity is probably the next thing that I'll be going into because I it's a topic that fascinates me. So
Awesome. Yeah, well, you can send me any links you would like me to put in the description to share with people. And so thank you so much for joining.
do I
Really,
get to ask you questions?
uh, you can. I mean, technically this is your interview, but
Well,
sure.
no, I'm curious because I have heard so much about you and read so much about you. And so I want to know, what is the next cool project that you want to work on that you think is the next direction you want to go with your learning?
Hmm. I mean, I think I sometimes I'll just be like learning about different things or going into just like there are certain things that I just like learning about, and then I'll just stumble across a different something new. I don't necessarily I have a lot of I'm basically interested in everything, so it's really hard to say.
That's
Um
fantastic though.
yeah, I mean I think a lot of what I'm interested in is like psychology and people how people think but yeah, I mean everything, I guess.
You mean like game theory when it comes to designing and coding?
I mean, I like psychology and how it plays into that. I also like psychology of like just how to learn about people in the most effective way and being able to like understand how the brain works and why people act the way they do, and then how does that tie into a bunch of like everything else that I'm learning about. Like maybe it's just like is this certain thing happening in the world, and then you can just tie it back to, well, maybe it's because of like these certain functions in the brain that cause people to think in this certain way and then act in this certain way. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Good. Well, cool. Well, I look forward to seeing what your next cool project is.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the interview. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. I learned a lot.
Well, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.